Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. On behalf of WUDAC and the Wharton Customer Analytics, we want to thank everyone for attending this event. We're excited to host Victor Cho, CEO of Evite and Wharton alum, for today's industry speaker series co-hosted by Wharton Customer Analytics and the Wharton Undergraduate Data Analytics Club. My name is Rachel Levin, and I'm the president of WUDAC. I'm a senior in Wharton studying statistics and finance.
Hi guys, my name is Tiffany Moy, and I'm the VP of WUDAC, and I am a junior in Wharton and engineering, studying computer science and business analytics. So just a bit of background on the BlueJeans application if you guys have not used it before. Some features to highlight is on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see a set of functions that you can use. One of them is the poll feature, and we recently just released a poll asking about your Penn affiliation. So if you guys have not filled that out yet, it'd be great if you guys could do so really quickly now. A second feature to also highlight is the Q&A function. So we'll have a Q&A portion of this event later on. And if you guys have any questions that you would like to submit for that, please use the function there to submit your questions. And finally, you can also toggle your event layout. You can change how you see the event itself by using the slider tool below the speaker's video. So with that bit of background, I'll pass it on to Rachel to introduce our amazing speaker.
Just a little bit of background on WUDAC. We are the primary undergraduate organization for all things data analytics at Wharton, hosting industry speakers, holding educational workshops, and running our Wharton Analytics Fellows consulting program. We work closely with Wharton Customer Analytics throughout the year to host these kinds of speaker events, collaborate on industry projects, and promote student engagement in analytics at Wharton. I'd now like to give a warm welcome to our guest today, Victor Cho. Since joining Evite as CEO in 2014, Victor Cho has redirected the popular brand into a customer-obsessed company focused on helping people celebrate together wherever they are. He has achieved revenue growth and taken the company into exciting new ventures, including text message invitations, donations for nonprofits, virtual events with video chat, and Evite Pro, an event management subscription designed with professionals in mind. Prior to joining Evite, Victor was most recently the CEO driver of a holistic and multi-year turnaround effort at Kodak Gallery. Before that, he served as the vice president and leader of Intuit's web channel, taking the business from $300 million to $1.3 billion by fundamentally changing the company's web strategy, organizational structures, processes, and technology platforms. Victor also spent 7 years at Microsoft, where he launched the company's earliest internet marketing and software as a service initiatives. Victor earned a Bachelor of Science from right here at the Wharton School. Victor, thank you for taking the time to speak with us today.
Hey guys, pleasure to be here. Hello. Awesome. I just realized that intro sounds very corporate speak. I need to go revise that. I think I kind of sound like a robot. But hey guys, it's a pleasure to be participating back at my alma mater. I've been involved a bunch of different threads with Wharton, but in particular around the kind of the data and the customer analytics side of the world, where I have a lot of passion. So we've got, I think I'm going to have about 20 minutes where I'm going to walk through, for lack of a better term, my CEO journey, give you a little bit of a sense of my career arc, and in particular, how does data and analytics, statistics, etc., how does it play a role, how did it play a role, still plays a role in that journey? And then we'll have a open Q&A. So that's what we've got on deck. Next slide, or first slide. So quick high-level update for those of you that don't know Evite. We tend to go after a slightly older demographic, so I'm guessing your parents know Evite well. Hopefully, at some point in time, they threw a birthday party for you using Evite. But if you're not familiar, we are the world's largest digital invitation platform and social gathering platform, predominantly US-based. We'll reach around a quarter of the US population in a normal year. I say normal year because, of course, we've got COVID going on this year. But here's some scale numbers. We'll get several hundred million annual visitors. We've got a bunch of registered users. Every year, we'll send out around 200 million invitations. Probably the two numbers I'm most proud of here are this 3 billion and the 20 million in terms of donation raise. So the 3 billion, that's kind of it's a simple hacked statistic. So it's not exactly accurate, but it's basically an N choose K derivation of how many face-to-face connections we've enabled in our lifetime. And we think that's around 3 billion. So again, if you go to a party and you're meeting another person, we're considering a pairwise connection as a face-to-face connection. But that's the heart of what we do, is we help people throw parties and bring people together face-to-face. The other tidbit that I really love is this $20 million raised for nonprofits. And this, I think, is a message I'd love to give for any of you that long-term have leadership aspirations. I fundamentally believe, and you'll see this reflected in this number, that if you are lucky enough to control any kind of scale lever in the society, whether that's you're running a business or a nonprofit or a university, you have a social obligation to turn that scale into some kind of social good. And I feel really blessed about Evite because we have social impact on two levels. We have it on one level because the network itself, as it gets more robust and as we do a better job at delivering customer value, brings people together face to face, which is awesome because it's healthy and helps you live longer, literally. And then the second piece is we are using that platform to do social good. So we've raised $20 million over the last 3 years. We're a smaller company on a revenue basis, so the equivalent of that, if it were Google, would literally be like them raising $300 billion for nonprofits or something crazy like that. So that's Evite in a nutshell. I've been here around 6 years. And the next slide, I'll walk you quickly through my what's called my journey line. This is also a cool tool to use. I actually go through my journey line anytime I go into a new team or a new company as a way to effectively describe who I am and what has been my career and what has given me emotional highs versus emotional lows. So I'll walk you guys just at a high level through this, and then we'll go into a couple of tips that I have for you since you guys are all early in your careers. So as was mentioned, I'm class of 93, long time, 27 years ago. Class of 93 undergrad, Wharton. The cool tidbit there that I'd like to share is back then, there was not this great customer analytics focus for the university. It was very finance focused, of course, and I started on the finance and computer science side of the world. But I quickly realized that the underpinning of all finance is just deeper statistics and math. And so I asked the school at the time if I could concentrate in statistics, which didn't exist as a concentration, but they were awesome. And they said, sure, we'll let you custom craft a statistical concentration because we like your logic. I ended up taking all those classes with a bunch of psychology PhDs because that's where all the high level analytics classes were, which was also awesome because I love psychology. But graduated there and went straight to Microsoft. I launched a bunch of their first commerce sites. I spent 7 years there, which is the longest time I've had at any company up until now. Evite's going to get close. Had a great run. This was when Microsoft was going through its very early, incredibly rapid growth phase. So the company like 20 or 30x over that period of time. I left. So that was kind of that high point. I left that and started my own company. So this was way before most of you probably remember, but there was this thing called the first .com bubble. It was a massive market implosion around the first wave of internet companies. And I had the unfortunate timing of leaving Microsoft literally right before that bubble burst. Left Microsoft. I took some friends with me from Microsoft. We threw in a bunch of our own money. We went out and raised money from friends, an angel round. We pulled 20 or 22 people out of some really good jobs in New York, from Goldman and Morgan Stanley. And then literally 2 or 3 months later, the entire market collapsed. And so that was that big precipitous, almost vertical drop in terms of my personal fulfillment, because that was rough, both financially as well as, we eventually shut the business down. The concept was good, by the way. It was the App Store on Windows before the phone existed. So it was a little bit before its time. From there, I went on to a number of different roles, and I'll talk a little bit more about this as I go through some of my key advice for you guys. But I went through a bunch of roles with the specific goal of learning how companies operate at different levels of scale and at different points in their life cycle. And I'll explain, that sounds weird. Why would you go do that? I'll explain that in a second. But I went to a small company called iVillage. It was like, maybe 100 people, if that. I went to a medium-sized company, which is Intuit. I went to a turnaround, which is Kodak Gallery, and then Evite. all along that road, I was basically building skills, learning and growing. And then my first CEO role came at Kodak Gallery. So I was recruited out of Intuit. At that time, I was running their web channel, as mentioned, which was a $1 billion plus online channel, and took my first CEO role. That company we ended up selling to Shutterfly in 2020, 2014, I want to say, or thereabouts. And then joined Evite, and I've been with Evite for around 6 years. So that's my career arc at a high level. In all of these roles, I went from, it was all business focused. So Microsoft, I was building new channels. ZapSpot, I was more of founder, president. Intuit was owning kind of the online channel. And then, of course, CEO roles, you own a little bit of everything. So that's the arc I went through. In terms of some lessons for you guys, I would love to share just 5 things that have driven me that might be useful tidbits. If any one of these lands and you walk away with it as leaving an impression, I'll feel good. So lesson number 1 is to try to define and refine your personal true north as much as possible. So this is Aragorn from Lord of the Rings. You're going to see a lot of really old cultural references in here because I'm 50, which is kind of sad. But this is kind of what grew up, and these were my formative experiences. So when I was a little kid back in high school, I knew that I wanted to be a CEO, but I didn't know that it was called being a CEO. I just knew that I loved, Lord of the Rings was my favorite book, and I loved the concept of the general and the king, right? The person who was mobilizing the systems and the resources and setting long-term strategy like that. I knew that was appealing. That hit me intellectually is what I wanted to go do. I knew nothing about business, and I didn't grow up in an environment where I had mentors or advisors. But very quickly, as I got to Wharton, figured out, oh, that's called a CEO, and that's what I want to go be someday. I also knew that I wanted to do that in software, because at the time, the Commodore 64, early computing device, was the thing that I was most passionate about. So I was very lucky from that perspective, in that I had a guiding light, right? What I call a big why. If you think of regression function, right, you got a bunch of X's leading to, right, the outcome metric. So some people call that your true north, your big why. For me, that was very clear. It made all of my career decisions super, super easy, because I now had a filter to say, well, is that going to help me long-term build the skills to become a successful CEO or not? I know I'm a unique beast from that perspective. I talk to a lot of people and they don't really know what their true north is, but my guidance is, to the extent that you can either define it or you can get closer to it, even if it's a directional sense. I kind of want to head in this direction versus that. Super important for you as you make your career decisions, kind of where you build your skills. So that's kind of thought number 1. Thought number 2 is to master the power of options. I remember this chart viscerally from one of my early finance classes at Wharton. I don't know if you guys have seen this chart yet, right? This is the option payout return curve, right? It basically says you spend $2 on an option, and that stock, with a strike price of $20, and that thing, right, goes above that, you get gain, right? So you're going to pay a little bit for, right, long-term upside. Power of an option. Didn't know that existed before finance. Thinking about your life and your career in terms of options, I find, was one of the most valuable things for me as I thought about the future, because so many of your decisions are not clear, right? There may be some that are obvious. It's like, oh, of course I would go take that step, but a large chunk of my time as a CEO, people are surprised at this. It's not fighting the day-to-day. A very small chunk of my time is actually fighting in day-to-day. It's thinking long-term and building optionality for the business, for myself personally. And so that concept, thinking in terms of options and downstream, probabilities and expected values, something that I'm sure you guys are all getting exposed to, super, super valuable as you think of business strategy, personal growth, whatever it is. So definitely embrace that. It's a very powerful construct. And again, super valuable if you don't know your true north, right, on that first one. You don't know where you're going, but you kind of know, I want to work in, something in finance is going to be interesting to me, right? Because I'm passionate about finance. You can start building blocks, making connections, et cetera, that create optionality paths for you in the future. That's thought number two. Number three, and again, hopefully a lot of these concepts will be familiar in terms of some of the curriculum you guys are looking at or going through today. Number three is that you absolutely, from my perspective, to succeed at the higher levels of business, to become a CEO, a successful CEO, you have to be a critical systemic thinker. I've had a lot of people ask me, like, what would I need to do to get to the next level? And there's, of course, content domain knowledge. There's things you need to learn. You need to understand the space in which you function. But probably the hardest thing that I find to build skill set in is systemic critical thinking. And I've thought long and hard about where that comes from. And it's one reason why I believe the curriculum that you guys are going through is so valuable, because at its core, it's absolutely a trainable skill. And I think the things that build that skill the best are things like mathematics, statistics, computer science, systems engineering, right? These hard skilled disciplines where you are learning things like, feedback systems, and stocks and flows and probabilities, etc. Incredibly valuable. At some point, you are able to synthesize very complex problems very rapidly because you have the underlying toolkit. And it's not that you're applying a formula here or there. It's really that you have kind of gelled all those individual components in a way that lets you think more critically and systemically. So from that perspective, I can't wait for a lot of you guys to kind of graduate and come out, because again, I think those building blocks that you're learning are going to be they're going to give you what I call infinite runway. Where I see executives top out is they don't have that critical systems thinking skill. And if you don't have that underpinning that I've talked about, then it's very hard to get it later. Thought number four, to be able to identify good data from bad data. This is an old Star Trek. For those of you that have no idea who this person is, basically an android or artificial being. This is the good version, the bad version. All these jokes, I'm sure, are lost on you guys. But this is, again, going back to that systemic thinking comment, this is probably one of the biggest values that I will add to an organization as a CEO. And again, one of those key skills that comes from those harder domains like statistics. And what does this mean? This means I call this understanding the nature of the beast that you're fighting, is one way I talk about this, which is so much of business is actually, it's fairly easy, right? Once you actually know the nature of the beast you're fighting, whatever that is, whether that's a competitor you're trying to go attack or a market you're trying to go own or whatever it is, once you know exactly what you're fighting, mobilizing the resources and getting the capital, creating an organization that can go attack it, those are what I call our known problems. Like there's a very structured toolkit to go do that. The hardest thing in many ways is to understand what the hell are you what are you doing? Like what's important? Where are you focusing your energy? And that all comes down to data. That all comes down to, like, are you able to look at, again, a very complex system at a high level, figure out what data is good, what data is bad, what data you should action, etc. And again, that's not something you learn overnight. That comes from layers and layers of quantitative skill building and being in those environments. We all lived through, we're in the process of living through a good data, bad data election, as you guys can tell, right? Polling was horrendously off. We did not understand the nature of the beast at a societal level, right? All the data was bad, which of course, right, led to a whole lot of actions that were probably wasted in some ways, in certain places. That's super important. And then last but not least, this has really nothing to do with data, but it's just advice I love to give folks. This is from a movie called Office Space. Again, I don't know if you guys have seen it, but there's it's a funny scene. There's a guy named Peter who's kind of sitting where you guys are looking. He's basically an individual who gets promoted. He doesn't even ask to get promoted. He just kind of tells it how it is, and he earns the respect of these two consulting gentlemen who basically say, "Well, you're awesome. We're gonna promote you." It's kind of a funny scene, a pretty funny, albeit old movie. But this is something I have seen, especially in the new and kind of the younger folks floating into the various work environments that I've managed. I see an overemphasis on title and pay. And I see that is their big why. That is their true north right there. I see people that are just like looking at, well, what's that next role, and how do I get it, and why aren't I there already? And that's all they're transfixed on. And my message to all of you guys would be, and you can take this or not. My message would be, I became a CEO fairly young, so my first CEO role was, 10 years ago, 40 years old, something like that, of a multi-$100 million business. I have never in my career asked for a title, and I've never asked for a raise. I have always focused on three things, right? What is the maximum business impact I can have in the organization that I'm working in? What is the maximum amount of learning that I can get out of this organization and the people around me? And what are the core skill sets that I can build here uniquely because of the people around me or the environment that I'm in, that are going to help me down that true north path? That's been my career filter for every single decision, every single role. And that has rapidly accelerated me through companies like Microsoft or Intuit, and ultimately landed me in a CEO role. I didn't go searching for that role. That role actually came and found me through the power of recruiting. So I just want to leave you guys with that as a thought. It's not to say that title and those things aren't important and that you shouldn't be a proponent, right, of yourself in those environments. It's just a comment that says, think about the long game, be patient, and right, think about your big why, your true north, and build up those underlying skills. One of the most common things that I see that you guys absolutely want to avoid is, and I need to come up with a term for this, but you will see people that progress rapidly through an organization because they were too transfixed on title and pay, and they actually managed to work themselves up fairly high, but they don't have the underlying skills. And then they top out, and then they're ejected by the organization because they don't have the skills to continue forward. They're basically in over their heads. And then they have a very hard time because once at that point, right, you're ejected from an organization and it's very hard to land again. Like, you're much better off making a slow, steady progression. And the metaphor that I'd use for that is, if you're a boxer and your ultimate goal is to go fight Mike Tyson, right? You kind of want to. Mike Tyson was a really famous boxer, by the way, for those of you that don't know. You don't want to jump prematurely into the ring just because you're like, oh, I can go take that next, I can go to the next next level of challenge, unless you've got the underlying skill sets. Because you may work your way up to some point, but then at some point you're going to get pummeled. So work on your foundational skill set building. My core message on that. A little bit preachy, but I'll end with that, and we'll segue into to Q&A with Raghu.
Great. Thank you so much, Victor. This was amazing. And thank you, everybody. There are already a bunch of questions. I'm going to just take it in the order they came around and kind of tie in, Victor, with all the things that you brought up. First, thank you again. I think those 5 big takeaways are great for anybody, even for me. I was looking around and said, those are great takeaways. So
cool.
One of the things that understandably so, as you mentioned, I think, I guess you were lucky or perhaps more conscientious to kind of think about your big why. Perhaps many of us may not be as lucky. And so how do we kind of go about it? Are there some things that we should be doing in terms of figuring out that why? How do we balance kind of specialization versus kind of someone getting some of these broad skill sets as we're trying to figure out what the big why for us is?
Oh God, yeah, that's such a deep question. I don't know that I can give a blanket answer that would apply to everybody. I can probably just describe what worked for me, and then you may or may not get some inspiration for that. But for me, the things that drove my big why really all came down to where did I personally find myself being like really, really passionate and excited, right? So software, computers was one where if I just look at where did I spend my time when I was young? I gravitated towards, right, computers, just the precision of it, right, the elegance of computer languages, right? I was just passionate about it on many dimensions. And so I looked at that and said, wow, I'm not as passionate about anything else. And 2, does this have long-term runway? And I was lucky enough when I was a kid to say, like, oh yeah, this is the formation of a sea change in how we do, right? So kind of where am I passionate? And I guess the second one is where do I think my skill sets match that passion? So I'm passionate about. I'd love to. There's some things that I'm passionate about that I'm really not very good at, and I've got I've got the I guess the objectivity to say, okay, that's something, I can dabble with that as a hobby, but that's not going to really tap into my core skill sets. So
Great. No,
maybe
I
the
think that
overlap of those two things,
no, no, I think
passion
no,
plus
great,
innate skill.
great point. I think that in itself kind of figuring out what you're good at, what you're great at, and what perhaps you may be good at, but not, not something that you would like to do as a living. I think that's a great takeaway. Um, Another question that came around, I think, very similar to, I think, related a little bit, is that your career path has been perhaps intentionally so, as you mentioned in one of the figures, it's like a little bit non-linear. You
Mhm.
perhaps intentionally went about saying, what are the skill sets I would like to gather
Yep.
before I perhaps transition to where I really want to be.
Mhm.
Any advice, just from the perspective of when did you decide, okay, this is the right time to move? As you went through these transitions, like, well, I've learned what I needed to learn in one company, time to move to something
Yep.
else. So, like, was there a critical juncture? How would you advise people to do that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. For me, it came down to a fairly simple equation, which is at some point in time, like you're always exposed to other opportunities throughout your career, and you're in your current environment. And for me, it was always a very simple equation of like, what am I going to go learn there versus what am I learning here? It
Yeah.
literally came down to that. And what skills am I going to build there versus what skills am I going to build here? And at the point in time where it was clear that, oh, that's a better learning and skill set development opportunity, independent of whether it was more or less money or what the title
Yeah.
was, I would go for that route.
Wonderful. Again, great point. I mean, I think many of us and many of the people who are in the audience here who are starting out their careers, I think that was very valuable advice, especially in terms of gathering skill sets as opposed to perhaps quote unquote gathering titles.
Yep.
Because understanding what you're interested in and kind of intentionally going about it is perhaps the best way to go forward and keep learning all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Growth mindset. I don't know how much, that's in some ways an overused term, but yeah, that, having a perpetual growth mindset
yeah,
of,
yeah.
constant skill set expansion is, I think that's super important.
So a related question, and I'm kind of, I'm looking at some of the questions. I just want to kind of go in the direction where I think some of the people are bringing up some related questions. I think as you're giving answers, perhaps they're bringing up other questions.
Yeah.
One of the question is, in some sense, not everybody perhaps will become a CEO, or perhaps they don't aspire to be a CEO. So at some point, what would you say for people who perhaps may not want to be in that direction, but they want to build a very deep relationship with a company? At what point do you say, well, do you not ask for a raise? Do you not ask for a promotion? How do you go about this? Like, I would encourage a lot of people to find their big why, but if their big why is within a company, how do they kind of take that direction?
Yeah, at least from my perspective, I don't think my advice changes. And I would say, the question is not like, I want a promotion, right? I think the conversation in the company is, with your manager, whoever, it's like, what skill sets do you think I'm missing, right? How can I have more business impact, right? Where can I develop that will move me up to the next phase? And you're not asking for a raise or you're not asking for promotion. You're saying like, how do I have more business impact? What do I need to develop? And if you do that, the promotions and raises will come.
Oh, great point. I knew one of my friends who intentionally every 2 years or so, he was in a big consulting company, decided to change the vertical he was working in just because he wanted to not, in some sense, not become specialized, but just get to know other parts of the business.
Yep. Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah, Microsoft did that. GE is famous for doing that. Yeah, I had 4 different jobs at Microsoft. Every year and a half or so would get rotated into a new role. Some of those, the company saying, hey, let's go stretch you here. Some of them were areas. Actually, when the internet first came on board, that was a great example. This was in 1995, right? Super, super early in the days of the internet. And Microsoft had a very traditional marketing organization back then, right? Organized by functional groups. So you had PR, direct mail, advertising, etc. And that was a good example where I didn't ask for a raise or promotion, but I went to the head of marketing and I said, hey, I fundamentally believe that online is going to be a huge marketing channel. We don't have an online marketer. I would like to become that person. Like,
nice.
Can I do that? And they're like, wow, that's great. Yes, the business needs that. So we constructed, right? I was the first worldwide online marketing manager for our consumer products division. There was no discussion of title or raise in that discussion. It was simply, I think the business needs this, and I think I can add value here. And are you guys, can we go do that? It eventually came, of course, with raises and titles and all of those things, but that was not the first salvo.
No, that's great. Again, I think kind of related back to your point about just constantly learning and looking for that opportunity to
Yeah,
hopefully find new things to get excited with.
yeah, yeah.
Um, Two related questions again. One is more short term, one is more long term. So I'll start with the long term one first, and then I'll go to the short term one. The long term one is if you look at today's environment and your experience in different companies now at Evite and kind of just getting experience over time, and looking ahead in the next 10 years or so, what are the skills that you feel people in the audience, the students that are here, should try to master while they're in school?
I mean, going back to what we just talked about, that core analytic systemic thinking foundation will last forever. This is one reason that I think it's so powerful right there. There are a lot of content domains that will go through pretty radical change, marketing, advertising, right? But the ability to understand complex systemic problems and have a toolkit to go attack it, that is universal, and you'll use that forever. So that, again, I just love this. I'm jealous that this curriculum and kind of this focus wasn't all here, because I probably pieced together chunks of it. So that would definitely be one. The other one, I don't know if there's a direct answer to the question, but I see it here just in the thread, so I want to answer it, which is, what else can you do while you're at Penn to be valuable for your career? So one thing that I did horribly, and if I could change one thing, I would go back and change this, is I didn't appreciate at a young age the power of personal connection.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm naturally an introvert. And so, I've got a close, group of Penn friends. I still talk, I was literally trading mails with them today.
Yeah.
But if I think about the network that was at the school and what they've gone off to do, like I had so many more opportunities to build connections that would have been super valuable in the future. And that's one thing where you guys are literally, you're in an environment where the cohorts that you're in are going to go run large chunks of the world someday. Right? And so, it may not be obvious to you, but definitely kind of that power to build those connections and maintain those connections over time. It takes energy, right? It doesn't happen naturally. I did the same with at Microsoft. I lost many of my early Microsoft connections because I didn't appreciate how powerful those connections were. And it's kind of like a plant. You got to keep them watered. You got to keep them robust.
No, great point. And I think, from these connections, you perhaps find other opportunities as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
So a related question again is, and it's perhaps a little bit in your career journey and, as you've changed over time, one of the questions is that, you mentioned only preparing to make the jump. Have you ever faced imposter syndrome? And for someone facing that, would you change your advice?
It's so funny that somebody mentioned that. So I'm on a CEO council, where it's a bunch of other CEOs and executives. We meet twice a year, and that topic came up. And hopefully this doesn't come out wrong, but I actually did not know what that was. I did not know there was a thing called imposter syndrome. And the people were describing it, and I was like, so short answer, no, I've never had imposter syndrome. I think that comes back to, if you think about how I've architected my career journey, right? It's been all about building subcomponent blocks so that I could go do the next thing. And so I'm always very prepared at the next point. Like I'm very rarely in a situation where I land and I'm like, I have no idea what's going on, and people probably think I know what I'm doing, but I really have no idea because I've at least spent some modicum of energy figuring it out. And actually, I'll tie some of these threads back together. So one example, when I was running Kodak Gallery as CEO, we actually ran an auction process to sell that business off because we were part of Kodak, which was going bankrupt at the time. So we were working with private equity, venture capital, right? We ran an auction process. Now, I had never run a auction bidding process or worked in depth with private equity, but 5 or 6 years ago, I probably read 2 or 3 books on private equity, even though there was nothing that I was doing at the time that had anything to do with private equity, but it was one of those things literally in my list of things of like, wow, if I'm going to be a CEO someday, I should have a general understanding of the equity markets, right, and how they work. And so I literally dusted off those books. Was I an expert? Absolutely not. But did I feel comfortable sitting across the table from KKR or whomever we were talking to?
Yep.
Understand the lingo? Yeah, absolutely. So for me, it came back to that skill set building. I know that's not the case again because I was lucky to have the kind of the insight or foresight into where I wanted to go. So if you did have imposter syndrome and you felt like you were over your head, sorry, what was the sub question there?
Have you ever faced imposter? Which I guess the answer is no.
Yeah.
But for someone facing that, would you change your advice?
No, I think my advice would be the way to avoid it would be to, again, focus on skill set building, preemptive skill set building.
Yeah.
There's a great 2x2 matrix. It's called the Eisenhower Quadrant. I'm sure you guys have seen it, or maybe under a different term, right? But it has, what's urgent, what's not urgent, what's important, and what's not important, and where do you spend your energy? And I use that. I taught my kids that. I was like, you know what? If you guys are going to succeed in life, you want the vast majority of your time to be in the important, not urgent category. And what is in that category? That's things like building these foundational skill sets. Not that you need it today, you're going to need it in the future. But it makes everything so much easier. And again, creates optionality for you because you've got skills before you even need them.
No, great point. So another question that came along just now is, again, building off of many of the things that you had mentioned earlier, what would you believe would be the most standout thing if somebody had to put their resume or on LinkedIn or describe who they are? What would perhaps catch your attention?
That's a good question. What would jump out at me? I think any time that somebody has had a significant achievement overcoming a significant obstacle, that jumps out at me, right? So it's yes, impressive. Yeah, if there was a resume and someone was like, yeah, I know I was part of Google and I ran this huge thing, like, okay, I get it, but then there's always that question, well, how much of that was just the system? Like how much of that was you being carried by the momentum versus if someone said, oh no, I took over a business and flipped it around and it despite all of these hurdles, right, managed to turn it into something. It just shows that they've got kind of perseverance, tenacity. It's an indicator of execution ability, I guess, for lack of a better term. A little bit clearer.
Oh, very nice. And kind of related, I think somebody had early on had asked, which I think might be a good time to transition to that question. And I think we're also coming to an end towards the Q&A as well. Is would those be the kinds of things that you would look when you're hiring people, and are you hiring people?
So we are not hiring. We're actually doing the opposite because COVID, of course, is an existential risk to our business. We actually just downsized our company by about 50% so that we can survive the COVID curve. We did that a couple of months ago. So we're not hiring. When I do hire, we've actually got a very structured hiring framework, and we are not a typical company. But just to specifically answer the question, our hiring criteria will look for what we call the 3 C's that are must-have, and then the 3 C's that are nice to have. So the must-have C's are communication ability, critical thinking, and cultural fit. So those are baseline, and that critical thinking is really a synonym for this systemic thinking that I'm talking about. So we will ask anybody, regardless of function, like we will kind of drill into, like, do they have a critical thinking ability? And again, depending on the role, it'll be either super intense or maybe less if you're a copywriter. We still look for some kind of critical thinking ability. And then we'll come up with 3 what we call must-have capability, nice to have capabilities. And those will vary depending on the role, but we'll basically look at any given position and say, if this person were to come in and really nail it, knock it out of the park over the next couple of years, like what capabilities would they need to have? What capabilities would they need to prove to us that they had for us to feel confident that they can go take that straight for us? And that'll completely vary by role and time of the business. So that's how we generally run our hiring process.
Oh, great question. And thank you again for the person who asked that question, because I think kind of just understanding, what perhaps are things that, as very consistent with what you mentioned, kind of things that decision makers like yourself are looking for in people who want to be hired, I think is quite important. I think we're coming towards the end of time. I would love to hear, just passing words in terms of your piece of advice. I know you've given a lot, which I think is great nuggets. If there's 1 or 2 things, especially during this time, as students and yourself as well, as you mentioned, Evite going through pandemic and post-pandemic recovery, anything specific that comes to mind, especially along your lines of keeping the personal connections and anything of that nature would be great for the students to hear.
Yeah, no, one is just, well, I feel horrible for students because one of the most valuable things, one of the most memorable things from college for me, right, was all the face-to-face time that you spend with all your peers. And so I assume you guys are still locked down, all online at this
Yep,
stage.
everything online.
Yeah, it's not, there's literally, there's a biological difference between what we're doing now and being in the same room and shaking someone's hand or, giving a hug. It's just, I mean, we are large chunks of our brain are wired to be social creatures, and there are, literally multiple chemicals that will flow that are not flowing. So I'm bummed on behalf of you guys because you're missing some of that. Hopefully it'll come back soon. But my only thought would be, to the extent that you can even find little micro ways to do that comfortably and get some face-to-face time, even if it's socially distant, even if it's literally you going out with your friends and you're sitting 10 feet apart and sharing a coffee, those are psychologically very valuable. And so that would be just one comment: is try to get creative. Don't stay locked up in a room on Zoom all day. That's actually just very damaging overall to your psyche. So that'd be one. And then I guess the other thought is I have codified just a ton of how I think about leadership, running companies, career, all of that stuff. It's actually all online on that website. So
great.
Feel free to
wonderful
go cruise and kind of take whatever nuggets are valuable out of that.
No, thank you so much. Again, I'll now hand it over back to Rachel, but thank you so much, Victor. You've been an amazing ambassador, great collaborator with Wharton Customer Analytics, and I think invaluable piece of advice to a lot of our students who many of them perhaps aspire to be you. And so thank you again for taking the time and sharing your thoughts. All right, thank you. I'll pass it back to Rachel. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you, Professor Yengar. On behalf of WUDAC and Wharton Customer Analytics, thank you so much, Victor, for sharing your insights with us today. I know I learned a lot as a student of analytics, looking forward to the next year, the next 5 years, especially a lot of points to keep in mind for how to structure our careers. I also want to give a big thank you to everyone who attended our event today. We do want to note that after the event, we'll be sending out a short survey, and after you complete the survey, everyone who attended will gain access to a repository where the complete slide deck and recording from the event will be posted. Again, thank you, everyone. Thank you very much, Victor, for spending the time with us today, and hope everyone has a nice day.